So as we watch the Russian mayhem that threatens the very existence of Ukraine, it's been 50 years since that other war that gave birth to Bangladesh. Telling us this story in Jayanta, Pandian, Shankar, Debu, and Shamol from the IIMC 1972 batch as they traveled through the newborn country on their own immediately after the war was won. So it's all yours, Jayanta and your team. We are all ears. Go ahead.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for this warm welcome. Just to tell you, Pandian is online. I can see him. I can see Debu. Shankar is also logged in. But Shamol, I'm not sure.
I think Shamol is probably not joining. He got caught up somewhere.
Yeah. No problem. So we will manage. So I think very quickly, you said all of us have been to Bangladesh. Let me be clear on that. The 4 people who went to Bangladesh included Pandian and Shamol. The other 2 batchmates who went are no longer with us. Ganesh passed away earlier while the book was being written, and Clement passed away a few years ago. So only the 2 of them are left who had gone to Bangladesh. Debu and Shankar had gone to visit some of the refugee camps in the border of Bengal and Bangladesh. I actually didn't go to any of these places. I led a pretty sheltered life in the campus, participated in the bonfire and the drunken Bangla parties to celebrate the formation of or the surrender of the Pakistan army. But when the idea of the book was mooted, then I was perhaps in a way some kind of a little spark, catalyst to say, get this damn thing done. So some forums, Pandian has referred to me as the taskmaster, slave driver, etc., etc., etc. So at least, that was my role. I had a little bit of writing to do, which is the last chapter, which is the epilogue, and some odds and ends about the introduction. So that's my, really small role in the writing, but some role to say to get a bunch of lazy IIMC guys to work, you know how difficult that is. But I at least managed to get this one out of the way. So enough of me. So maybe Pandian, you want to talk about all that?
Okay. Jayant was being very modest. Actually, let me start telling you how this book is put together. This obviously contains the complete description of the journey 4 of us made in 71. It contains visits to refugee camps by Debu and Shankar, and it would have been incomplete if the environment in 71 in the institute around us in India, around the world, was not brought out, and that's the part that Jayant has played in bringing the whole thing together. These are the 3 parts that the book has. I just want to take a minute to explain what was the condition at that time in the world. Pakistan was ruled by military rulers, and that has been the story of Pakistan all through, in a major way or minor way. And in 70, there was an election. Mujibur Rahman won the election. Awami League got majority across the entire country, West Pakistan and East Pakistan. And the military rulers of West Pakistan obviously did not want him to become prime minister. And that's how the whole mayhem started. In March 71, Mujibur Rahman announced that Bangladesh would become an independent country, and he was arrested. And the military rulers of Pakistan went into Bangladesh with vengeance and caused all kinds of things. And that's a time when we were entering the institute. And for us, one side, the excitement of being in the institute, other side, the news that we were reading, hearing in the news radio was completely very contrasting kind of an environment we are living in at that time. And it was quite a painful thing that we were being exposed to. So this is the background, and it's probably not much different from what's happening right now in Ukraine and Russia. World is just watching. Nobody was participating. Nobody is trying to sort out the mess that was going on. Cut to December, 16th of December, 93,000 Pakistani soldiers surrendered to Indian Army and Bangladesh resistance forces. 17th of December, 4 of us left in the morning and decided to cross the border. And that's the journey that we are talking about. As the title of the book suggests, it's birth of Bangladesh, and equally important is eyewitness memories. So we are talking about what we saw, what we experienced, how we felt 50 years ago. And fortunately, we were able to remember quite a bit of that in all the Zoom conversations we had while we were writing the book. Let me just take a couple of segments of the journey. The first one is when we, how do we cross the border? We actually took a train. We went to a border town called Bangor, expecting that there would be some way to be able to cross the border. And when we reached there, we found there was actually a train leaving for Bangladesh carrying refugees. That was the first train. Indian Railways had organized the train for a batch of Bangladesh refugees to travel across the border. And there was actually a railway track which has existed apparently even from before independence, and it was just blocked off at one place. And that experience itself was a very, very telling experience for us, because whatever we saw there, three types of experiences which repeated right through the journey of 1 week that we went to Bangladesh and came back. In the train, we were actually packed like the way the unreserved compartment will travel, and we reached Jessore, and from Jessore we are again trying to figure out where we are going. We didn't have a plan in terms of what we are going to do, which place we're going to visit, who we're going to meet. It was, let's go ahead and see what happens, let's keep going. And somewhere in that stretch from Jessore is when we were trying to figure out we should go up to Dhaka. We were telling ourselves, let's keep going and let's find out what's going to happen. So the three experiences I talked about, the first one was walk. That was the core theme of our entire journey. Most of the distances we covered by walking, and occasionally we were lucky and we would get some transport. And this is what happened to us when we were walking from Jessore. After maybe about 20 odd kilometers, we heard a jeep behind us, and we stopped the jeep, and there was an Indian major who was riding with a couple of his soldiers, and he actually agreed to take us further ahead. He gave us a lift, and first thing he told us was, we are stupid. We shouldn't have been there in that place at that time. We just a day after the war had been closed. But we got friendly, and he started telling us about what happened during the war, how people crossed the border, and the whole story about how the Indian Army moved across the entire country to reach Dhaka and things like that. He went into villages along the route, and every village he entered, the condition in the village just was pathetic, very painful to watch the sheer poverty and the conditions in which the people are living. But as soon as they saw the jeep, the villagers would come forward, they sit around, and with beaming smiles, they'd give everybody coconut water. They would even garland the major. A couple of times we were also garlanded. We continued this journey, and we reached the bridge. We had to cross Madhumati River. There was no bridge there. Just at that time, a motorcycle came. Two military police guys stopped us and said, we cannot be traveling in the jeep. And Major told us, okay, get down, you guys walk now. I'm going ahead. He crossed the river and went ahead. We crossed the river behind him, and just a little distance away, we find he was waiting for us. He said, I couldn't just stop you in the right in the middle of the path. I'll take you as close to Faridpur as possible, which was the next location for us. This was the kind of experience we kept having right through the entire journey. whether it was the Indian Army people, Mukti Bahini, or the local people we met. They were so friendly. It's not to say that it was all hunky-dory. There were also times when we were exposed to a situation where it was scary. It was like, should we continue? Should we? The people who would look at us with hostility, with sheer, the way they would look at us is like, you're outsiders kind of a thing. There were also times when there's some much more scary experiences. So these are the three kinds of things that we kept having right through the entire journey. So we'll go ahead. We reached Dhaka by a boat through an overnight journey. We landed in Narayanganj boat jetty. We got on, and then again we were trying to figure out where we are going. We were told we had to go to Dhaka, we had to walk some distance. We did that, and we entering Dhaka. We still don't have a clear idea in terms of, again, what we're going to do, who we're going to meet. And we were saying, okay, let's figure it out. It was fairly early in the morning, and we were strolling around the outskirts of Dhaka, and we saw a mosque and a few other places. Then we saw one stadium, and we said, let's go into the stadium. We went into the stadium. The world changed suddenly. There was a regiment of Indian soldiers who were there, and so we got to talking, and we were taken care of effectively. The whole day was provided for, and they told us, okay, you can join us. We are coming from Chittagong, and we are going to be spending a day in Dhaka. We're going around the city, and it was like a guided tour for us. The places that we couldn't have visited on our own, we couldn't even probably identify those places. We were just given a direct ride into it. Places like Dhaka Airport, the fairly well-known news about how Indian Air Force bombed the runway at regular intervals with huge craters. The book has a picture of one of the craters, and we were actually able to see them very close quarters. So the day went on like this. We went to multiple places, the governor's bungalow, Mujibur Rahman's house, and end of the day, the soldiers said, look, we are going back to our base, so you guys are on your own. And we are back to, again, the same situation of trying to figure out where you're going to do. And we are just wondering, and suddenly we get called into the house. And we meet two members of Mujibur Rahman family. They were young people like us, probably about our age only, and had a conversation. They were curious that there were 4 young men who had come from India on their own to see Bangladesh when the country had just got liberated. And they said, okay, we'll take care of you. We'll tell Mukti Bahini to provide for your staying arrangement. And that's exactly what happened. A couple of days, we moved around. The youngsters who were with us were, it was such a nice experience meeting them, because they were able to tell us what all they experienced. There were students like us who had stopped attending colleges early 71. They talked about the kind of training they received, the kind of experiences they had, and that also had to come to an end because it was time for us to move on. On the return journey, we used a different route, which was recommended by the Mukti Bahini friends, and they had given us references of people we could take help from. And that was very different from the onward journey, because all the things that happened to people, the effects of atrocities that people experience, we were able to see the results of those on that return journey. One place we were walking, we saw a pond at distance, and what we saw was people were taking things out of the pond, and there was a collection of piles of white stuff at a distance. When we got near the pond, we could see there were human bones. The people told us the Pakistani army had massacred people in the village, and they dumped the bodies in the pond. And now that the country was independent, they were taking out the bodies, or what remains of the bodies. And this was a kind of experience that we saw on the return route. And some of them were the kind of thing where even seeing them in that situation, we are just not able to absorb them. It took us many hours to overcome that before the next one hit us. Many experiences like this. The most scary one was, of course, in the last town we visited, a place called Chennai. We met a man who was in blood-soaked clothes, and his explanation to the villagers was that he had chased a Razakar who was responsible for his entire family being killed by the soldiers, and he had chopped him, he killed him. And the villagers were standing around listening to his narrative were just very casual about it. I couldn't say casual, they were not reacting to anything that we were saying. For us, it was a situation where we had to figure out in our minds whether it was justified or it was a crime. So this was the kind of experience that we felt. I've just given you bits and pieces of some of our experiences. So it ended with late night. Shamal and I walked out of the hut we were sleeping in because we heard some noises, and we were surrounded by some people who were wearing some uniform. They looked like soldiers, and we were being poked with bayonets in our backs. And anyway, we survived those experiences, and that's why we are here talking to you. Hopefully the book has brought out what we saw very well and the experiences that we went through. 1 week it took us. We are back in Emerald Bower campus. It's something which still remains in our memory very, very vividly. I'll stop here. I think that I probably have taken much longer than what I was given time for. If Debu is there, we could probably, or Shankar is there, so you could probably talk about briefly the refugee.
I'll start off, I think.
Yeah.
Since mine was a prequel to your visit, it was sometime in October. The refugees were pouring in. There were several refugee camps. In fact, something like 6 million refugees had already crossed the borders. And one day, Gaurango Chattopadhyay, Professor Gaurango Chattopadhyay, informed us that Oxfam had asked him to do a survey of one of the refugee camps to try and assess what the refugees really needed. So there were a handful of us Bengali-speaking IIMC 7th and 8th batch students, who went across in 2 jeeps, and we went to this refugee camp in Bandgaon, and it was drizzling. Refugees were all in tents on a huge field, slushy field, and it was our job on behalf of Oxfam to go around finding out what they needed. You see, what happened was, as soon as Oxfam heard about the refugees streaming across, they had, tried to get people to donate various items abroad. And what came across was, a lot of warm clothes and, sweaters and coats and whatnot. Whereas what the refugees needed over here were, in the middle of summer and monsoon rains, they wanted other sort of clothing, like lungis and, banyans and things like that, and saris. And they also needed a lot of medicines because there was an outbreak of cholera in the camps. And, this was something which Oxfam had not realized. And I think, our survey played a role in trying to focus their relief effort along proper directions. And that's what happened. At this Bandgaon camp, we also came across that same railroad, which Anjan talked about, which he used for, crossing over to the other side. And it was fascinating because we walked across to the other side of the border and walked down the railroad. But then, we were called back and told that it was dangerous to go across. And you must imagine that, we were at that point of time just 21-year-olds, just getting exposed to really atrocious situation, anarchy, as we talked about earlier. And based on this, we came back and, we all heavy. I think I'll hand over to Shankar, who had a sequel to the Pandian and company's visit. And he talked about his trip to another refugee camp. Over to you, Shankar.
Thanks, Debu. In fact, Pandian also mentioned about the situation today happening in the world because of the Russian war. And they are talking about maybe 4 million refugees might ultimately cross over from Ukraine. And that is the kind of situation when we are talking about refugees, it's a question of life getting unsettled. And it is a very shocking experience for the individual as well as the family. And my visit to one of the refugee camps, it was at Petropol. That was in February 1972, by which time definitely certain things have got settled. And it was only a brief, time period experience. I'll just make quote one sentence, which is also mentioned in the book. We have a lot of quotations from the testimony of 60, and John Drury, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, he says, "I found it impossible to shut away memories of what I saw in the refugee camps of West Bengal and along the trails leading out of East Pakistan." He is referring to the influx of the refugees. And in that corner of my mind, reserved for other horrors, because he has obviously been a witness to other horrors during the wars like Korean War or Vietnam War or the Egyptian War. He says the effect of sword, fire, starvation, they all differ very little in degree in the individual body and spirit. So it's a question of there are a few lucky survivors, and they proceed with a lot of hope, and also unlucky people who have lost many things. And personally, in fact, it is a similar kind of memory, as even mentioned by my friends also. Even after 50 years, it still lingers in our mind. I will say the 70 years of my life, it has been a relatively peaceful period in India, but for the two major wars, where not everybody was affected, whereas here now the world is going through a lot of turmoil. Coming to the actual experience, one is, I will say, from close range, the other one is from distance. The first one is a distance. I just went up to the border along with my cousin and friends. I saw a lot of refugees walking across the border, coming with a lot of hope towards the Indian side. I saw families, individuals with whatever belongings they left, and even some children. It was raining, and it was something like no man's land of few kilometers. And I mean, those kind of disturbances were nothing much for them, because they would have quite possibly seen much worse experiences directly. So they were coming walking with the hope. That itself was a first time experience, because as my friend was also telling, we were all quite young. The other one was a visit to the camp. And of course, unlike Pandya and other three friends, it was somewhat devoid of adventures, because it was a highly sanitized experience from my point of view. It was organized by one Caritas, is a social organization. Caritas means love for action. And by February 1972, they were able to get one camp really well managed and well run. And then we were given an opportunity to just visit one hut, where we just saw one lady and with one small child, maybe a few months old. And we saw just some utensils lying in the small hut, maybe not more than 8 by 8 feet size. And the one blank look which he gave for that time, a few, we can say 30 to 40 seconds, that no, what do you call, told the entire story to me. Maybe she would have lost her husband, or she might have lost her properties. And of course, we could not really communicate with her. But the blank look with a lot of, what do you call, loss of hope. And when she was looking at us, and that sight is, even after 50 years, it is still, very much strong in my mind. And that's what, I have given a brief note in the book. And so the point, main point here is, when we take life for granted on many occasions, but when suddenly, when something like a sudden wave, when it comes, it can really, dislocate everything, and things can go for a toss. And let us hope that kind of thing doesn't happen to too many of us. That is my only hope. Thank you. I'll just hand over to Jayanto.
Thank you so much. This has been a fascinating journey with you on your experiences. It just tells me that rather than look at it just as a fascinating adventure, it is a close and upfront look at the horrors and ravages of war, no matter where war takes place. So if there are any other reactions, questions for this group of friends, please go ahead.
Can I make a...
Go ahead. I just had a quick question. I mean, how did you guys manage, besides the army and Mukti Bahini, were there any places other than that where you could sleep? And given that the taka probably was not created and the Pakistani rupee wouldn't have worked, what did you guys do for money?
Interesting. I'll answer the second question first. Indian rupee was hot currency there. When we are walking from Jessore to Faridpur, food was, of course, absolutely not available. And our constant companion, apart from fatigue, thirst and hunger, it just was there. A few occasions we saw somebody walking with a basket full of what Bengali call deem, boiled eggs. We were able to have those eggs at prices which we didn't think were prices at all. Indian currency, we were paying in Indian currency, it was absolutely unmentionably cheap. Because, like you said, Dhaka was not there. There was no Bangladeshi currency. Likewise, everywhere, there were a few places we had to spend money for either buying some small snacks or crossing the river on a barge or something like that. The money was just, in fact, we had started the journey with 50 rupees each, and we came back with the major part of the money unused. Because fortunately, we were taken care of in multiple places by people. And many places they had these, community kitchens from which we were able to have food and things like that. Yeah.
I have a question. So there's a lot of talk about what the religious makeup of the people were. In your, travels there, do you see a very huge Hindu-Muslim divide or any swings to certain communities, given the scenario that took place with the Pakistan Army?
Personally, I would say yes, we were probably not that sensitive to the distinction at that age. Most of the people who met, the boys who helped us or the families we saw in the villages, they seemed to be all Muslims. Of course, when we read about things that happened, obviously a major part of the refugees were Hindus and things like that, but that's from what we read. We didn't notice anything in our entire journey.
Did you notice Punjabi Bengali differentiation?
Not really, except the Razakars were the Biharis who had migrated to Bengali. So that we saw. We did come across some of the Razakars in the, especially I said, there were communities, small hamlet kind of places where people are standing. They seem to be non-Bengalis kind of people. That's something.
If I may add something to that, there are two people whom we had contacted. recently, who are both living in Bangladesh and who had a major role to play in this 1971 period. One was a guy called Julian Francis, who was the Calcutta representative of Oxfam. He since stayed back in Dhaka and become a Bangladeshi citizen as well. So during conversations with him, and this book, it was not relevant really, he said that, the Indians, Indian army, of course, Indira Gandhi certainly, but Indians by and large were seen as heroes and liberators. They freed us, right? So there was a fair degree of a huge degree of enthusiastic welcome to Indians, not just to soldiers. For soldiers, there were other kinds of welcome available if they wanted. But that was the spirit. So it was more Indians rather than Hindu, Muslim, etc. And the other point that Julian mentioned, that during that time, survival was so far the most important thing to achieve. So religion really didn't, in his experience, religion really didn't play much of an thing at all. Yeah. How to get through the next few weeks and a few months and so on. That was critical. The other source is a gentleman called Mufidul Haq. Now, Mufidul Haq was a college student at that point in time. He dropped his studies, and he's a Bangladeshi from, I think he was from Dhaka or somewhere. I'm not too sure. So he set up later on something called the Liberation War Museum in Dhaka, and he's supported us with a hell of a lot of information and material. Again, his point was that at that time it was this was completely unimportant. Will I be alive tomorrow? That's the biggest question. So let's see it to the next. Try and make a new country happen, a new nation happen.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you.
I think in line with that is with the Razakars. Did the Razakars, they were obviously very badly treated. Now, in any case, they're walled off, and they are, people in Bangladesh with no status. They're not accepted by Pakistan. They're not accepted by Bangladesh.
Sure.
Did you see anything of that animosity building up?